Hello, everyone, and welcome to another lecture in Ethics and Journalism. It's possible that many of you have already heard about logical fallacies, but I think it's important, particularly in this class, to go through them one more time in order to get a sense of how to apply logic to ethics. We often times think of ethics as something that's emotional and that we need to drill into one another or to a larger group of people that there are emotions that involve ethics. And in fact, you need to step back and take the longer view of an ethical issue, and you have to apply logic. And logic is a very specific way to look at things. Going back to Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, and applying a variety of principles to examining a situation to come up with an ethical idea and solution to the issue at hand. What's coupled with this is what we're seeing a lot today are mistakes and fallacies in applying those logic in applying the logic. So let's go through some of them. Okay. So, what is a fallacy? When it applies to an argument or a discussion, they're defects that weaken the arguments. So they're common, they're quite persuasive, and you can find many of them in examples of journalism, ads, and other sources. Secondly, it's sometimes hard to evaluate whether an argument is fallacious. So an argument might be weak or somewhat strong or very strong. So an argument has specific stages or parts that have strong sections and some weak ones, and when you give them the same weight, you come out with something that may in fact be wrong. One of the most frequently used examples of this is the hasty generalization. So you make assumptions about a whole group or a range of cases that are based on a reasonably small sample. So you may have three friends who are Catholics, and so therefore you make generalization about Catholics based on three. That's an inadequate um, uh, survey or database, and so it creates a stereotypes. Okay, frat boys are drunkards, grad students are nerdies. These are examples of hasty generalizations. Okay, my roommate said her philosophy class was hard, and mine's hard too, so therefore all philosophy classes are hard. Well, all philosophy classes may be hard, but you need a much larger sample than simply you and your roommate. Okay. Another example of this is missing the point. So the premises, the first steps of an argument, do support a particular conclusion, but not necessarily the conclusion that you're trying to make. Okay? So the seriousness of punishment should match the seriousness of the crime. I think that many of us would agree with that. Okay? Right now, the punishment for drunk driving may simply be a fine. Okay? That's mostly true, but it depends. For some people who are driving drunk can actually be faced with loss of their licenses, or in fact may face jail time. Okay, but then we go on to, but drunk driving is a very serious crime that can kill innocent people. Okay, that's true, but now we jump to an extreme conclusion here, and we've missed the point. So the death penalty should be the punishment for drunk driving. Okay, so the the argument that you're making here, or that the individual is making here, has truth to it. Okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people who engage in drunk driving and hurt or kill someone should be put to death. Okay. There's the third one is called false cause, okay, or post hoc. It gets its name from a Latin phrase, which translates as after this, therefore because of this. So it's essentially that you have already deemed as true something that you're going to say. So sometimes one event really does cause another. Okay. So for example, if I register for a class and my name later appears on the class roll, it's true that the first event caused the one that came later. But sometimes the two events that seem related in time aren't really related to a cause and effect. So President Jones raised taxes and then the rate of violent crime went up, so Jones is responsible for the rise in crime. Well, he did raise taxes. Violent crime did go up, but what's the relationship between the two? We have to go further into providing more information and data to make sure that our assumption is correct. And in fact, it's quite likely that there are many other causes to violent crime going up than raising taxes. Slippery slope is probably one that you've heard frequently. Okay, but let's make sure that we all understand it. So what I'm arguing here is that there's a sort of chain reaction, one that ends in bad, dire consequences. Okay, but simply put, there's not enough evidence to actually argue that one step leads to another, and then, oh my God, the sky is falling, the sky is following. Okay, so animal experimentation reduces our respect for life. That's possible. If we don't respect life, we are likely to be more and more tolerant of violent acts like war and murder. Maybe. Soon our society will become a battlefield in which everyone constantly fears for their lives. Um, I don't think that you can justify that everyone constantly fears for your life, but you see, we're going from experimenting on animals, which I don't really have a position on animal experimentation because I think that it does some good and it does some bad. But does animal experimentation, can you link it to war and murder? Unlikely. Um, Is everyone constantly in fear for your lives? I don't think so. Many people may be. Okay. It will be the end of civilization? Unlikely. And so therefore we've built up this kind of almost fear-mongering to get to the conclusion, to prevent this terrible consequence, we should make animal experimentation illegal right now. Okay. Now, there are arguments that you can make against animal experimentation for cosmetics. Maybe it should be prohibited, or but it should be allowed for drug testing. But the various statements leads in the example we have here creates a slippery slope. So we go from one point to another, and the consequences becomes more and more dire as we go along. Okay. Another one is weak analogy. Okay, so that it's the classic. You can't compare apples to oranges. You have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Okay, so um, um, guns are like hammers. They're both tools with metal parts that could be used to kill someone. Okay, well, guns are much more dangerous than hammers are, um, and so therefore you've created an analogy that um, that that you know if and I don't want to get into a debate here on whether people should have Second Amendment rights or not have Second Amendment rights here, but to compare a hammer to a gun is just it's a pretty ridiculous statement, but it's what we call here a weak analogy. This one we see a lot, an appeal to authority. Okay, so essentially we create someone as a spokesperson for an event, and that spokesperson may in fact not have any real expertise, but has quote unquote authority. Okay, so we should abolish the death penalty. Many respected people, such as actor Guy Hansom, have publicly stated their opposition to it. Well, Guy Hansom may personally feel that it's a bad thing, but what authority does he have to speak for a larger group and to convince you simply because he's a popular figure on television or in motion pictures that he in fact is an important figure when it comes to the death penalty. We've seen this a lot when it comes to political campaigns, so that various actors or musicians or personalities will um, become quote-unquote authorities because they endorse a particular candidate or they endorse a particular point of view. Okay. An appeal to pity is one that we really don't see too much, except maybe toward the end of the semester when people are trying to get out of assignments. No, that's not fair. So I know that the exam is graded based on performance, but you should give me an A. My cat has been sick, my car broke down, I've had a cold, and so it was really hard for me to study. Okay, so you're an individual is trying to make me feel sorry for them because they had all of these burdens that they faced, and I do feel sorry for them, okay? But it doesn't necessarily mean that I should, as the professor, give the individual an A. Maybe the result probably should be, okay, all this stuff happened. I'll give you an extension of 48 hours to see, whether you can get all the materials done, and then we see what you get as a grade. Okay. So, and here's one which is an appeal to ignorance, okay, is that it creates a fallacy that you can't prove something that doesn't exist, okay? So people have been trying for centuries to prove that God exists, but no one has been able to prove it. Therefore, God does not exist, okay? There's an opposite one, which is people have been trying for years to prove that God does not exist, but no one has yet been able to prove it. Therefore, God exists. Okay, so the arguer is basically saying, look, there's no conclusive evidence on the issue at hand. Therefore, you should accept my conclusion on the issue. Okay. This one we also see an awful lot, the straw man, so that essentially you are saying that your argument is strong so that you're anticipating in advance to the arguments that your opponent might make, okay? So feminists want to ban all pornography and punish everyone who reads it. But such harsh measures are surely inappropriate, so the feminists are wrong. Porn and its readers should be left in peace, okay? So you essentially are not making a case for restricting or banning pornography and punishing people on the basis of data or a cohesive argument. You essentially are saying that that feminists are wrong. Your opponents are wrong. So you're creating the feminists as a straw man. A red herring is partway through an argument. The arguer goes off on a tangent, raising a side issue that distracts the audience from what's really at stake. Okay, so I start out with saying, okay, grading this exam on a curve would be the fairest thing to do. After all, classes go more smoothly when the students and the professors are getting along well. Well, wait a second. Okay, I've now gone from saying it should be graded on a curve and then off onto the relationship between the professor and the students. Okay, that doesn't have anything to do with grading the exam on a curve based on data. It simply is irrelevant to why I should in fact grade the exam on a curve. Okay. The false dichotomy. The arguer sets up a situation so that there are only two choices, when in fact there are another. There are 7 or 8 or 4. Okay, so an example: Annenberg is in bad shape. Okay, either we tear it down and put up a new building, or we continue to risk student safety. Obviously, we shouldn't risk anyone's safety, so we must tear it down. Now, I think that Annenberg Hall should be torn down. Okay, but I think that it should be torn down for reasons that include student safety. I think that the rooms are poorly configured. I think that the technology is outdated. It's hard to kind of keep the rooms working and in good order. But to put it as a dichotomy of it's in bad shape and therefore we need to tear it down because of student safety only creates a false dichotomy. Begging the question is one that you actually see a lot, but you might not know exactly what it is. Okay, so it is complicated, and the argument, it begs the question in asking the reader to simply accept the conclusion without providing any real evidence. Okay, so that an example here is active euthanasia is morally acceptable. It is a decent ethical thing to help another human being escape suffering through death. Okay, so here is in trying to create what the premise is. It is a decent ethical thing to help another person, human being, escape suffering through death. Okay, so therefore active euthanasia is morally acceptable. Okay, so the the discussant here has reversed the order of things. Okay, um, and so it may be it may be an accurate viewpoint. There's been a lot of debate on it, and some people say it is morally acceptable. Others, the difficulty is to define um, when suffering is sufficient, and should the state get involved? Should it be a personal decision? I mean, it's a complicated debate, and this tries to oversimplify it simply by saying I'm right, damn it, okay, and we're going to do it my way, okay. Active euthanasia is morally acceptable. That's begging the question. You've already stated your ethical determination without providing sufficient information about euthanasia. Okay, so these are some of the various fallacies that we see. You should be on the lookout for them. You now have some names for them, and the most important thing is to step back and look at an ethical situation. Okay, and look at it logically rather than emotionally. And most of these fallacies really have to do with emotion. You're trying to short circuit the process because you want to get what you believe to be the basis for others to believe, or I do the same thing. But we do these things all of the time, and I think what we need to do is step back and say, wait a second, it's a little more complicated than that. Okay, so let's look step by step on how we address the logic of an ethical question rather than simply stating what our emotional point of view is. So thanks very much, and we'll see you online.